Are you self-employed? Don't think you need business insurance? Think again. Business insurance from Zensurance is a no-brainer for every business owner because it provides peace of mind. A lot can go wrong. A fire, stolen equipment, or an unhappy customer suing you. That's why you need insurance. Don't let the "I'm too small for this" mindset hold you back from protecting yourself. Zensurance provides customized business insurance policies starting at just $19 per month. Visit Zensurance.com today and buy your policy online in just a few minutes. Zensurance. Mind your business.
Céline Dion.
My dream, to be international star.
Could it happen again? Could Celine Dion happen again?
I'm Thomas Leblanc, and Celine Understood is a 4-part series from CBC Podcasts and CBC News, where I piece together the surprising circumstances that helped manufacture Celine Dion, the pop icon. Celine Understood, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
For the third, maybe fourth time, the knives are out for Justin Trudeau.
Wednesday is going to be a great day. We're going to have a national caucus meeting among many other meetings.
But should the Prime Minister say?
No other comments, you guys.
You don't want to say
comment.
fight?
Liberal MPs are being asked if they're with the Prime Minister or against him, ahead of a Wednesday caucus meeting where it's believed dissatisfied MPs will ask for Justin Trudeau to step down.
Today, as the Liberal caucus meets, it is fair to wonder if this time is any different from the last time and the time before, when rumors swirled about a movement to oust the Prime Minister. This time seems more united, for one thing. And for another, while all of this has been going on, a handful of prominent Canadians, some of them Liberal politicians and others not, have been very politely explaining that no, they won't push Trudeau out the door, but should he choose to walk away on his own, they would be perhaps, maybe, definitely interested in the job of Liberal leader. So, is this time really any different? Does any of this matter if Trudeau is determined to hold on to the bitter end? What will happen at today's caucus meeting, in the days following? And what's next, in general, this fall in Ottawa? I'm Jordan Heath-Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Glen McGregor is a Parliament Hill reporter with City News, which means he's also a Parliament Hill reporter for us. And Glen, it's a busy day up there, I gather.
It's a very busy week, really kind of the most crucial week in Justin Trudeau's time as Prime Minister. One is existential. He could, in theory, lose his position as Liberal leader and therefore as Prime Minister before the week is done, although he's going to be, we think, fighting and resisting that as best he can.
We're going to get into all of that, but first, because I know this has been a topic of concern for some time. This is not the first time there's been a partial mutiny, I guess. Maybe just rewind and give us some context on the attempts to convince Trudeau to walk away over the past several months.
Yeah, those attempts really kicked into high gear in June, right after the Liberals lost what should have been a very safe by-election for them in the riding of Toronto-St. Paul's, a longtime Liberal stronghold. And that scared the heck out of a lot of Liberal MPs, particularly Liberals from Toronto, because Liberals who have a seat in Toronto don't expect to lose their ridings.
Right.
And that really scared them. So that's when we first started hearing about grumblings from within the caucus. So these are mostly backbench Liberal MPs who are expressing concern. And there was an attempt to kind of get a letter going, circulating among caucus members that they would send to the Prime Minister, calling on him to consider, at that point, stepping down. But that first mutiny was kind of quelled. It didn't really go anywhere. No one came out and publicly spoke out against the Prime Minister. It was all done kind of on the back channel anonymously. And then there was more of this a little bit at the caucus retreat. So this is where all the Liberal MPs gathered at the end of the summer in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And some MPs came out and said, listen, we're hearing on the doorstep when we go talk to our constituents in our ridings that they are very concerned about the possibility that the Liberals will lose the next election and Pierre Poilievre will become the next Prime Minister, that they were essentially tired of Justin Trudeau that they're not listening to him anymore. They've kind of tuned him out. A lot of them still like his policies and the way he's governed, but they just think it's time for a leadership change. And then the Liberals lost another by-election in Montreal, again, an area that should be pretty safe for the party. They lost to the Bloc Québécois narrowly in a riding called La Salle-et-Marne-Verdun. And that really kicked this discussion into higher gear. And now we hear a report that somewhere between 30 to 35 backbench MPs have signed on to this document, that they intend to physically give him the letter or at least confront him at a caucus meeting on Wednesday and verbally express that demand that he step down.
So what is different about this time? Because as you mentioned, a couple of previous attempts obviously began in June. It's late October. Trudeau has repeatedly said he's not going anywhere. What's different now?
I think it's the cumulative effect of the by-election losses, as well as looking at the plethora of public opinion polls that really shows since Pierre Poilievre became Conservative Party leader back in the fall of 2022, they've seen Conservative support rising, Liberal support falling consistently, and nothing the Liberals do really seems to turn things around. They put a lot of hope in the budget that came out in the spring, a lot of the measures to address the affordability crisis, the housing crisis. Mm-hmm. They spent billions and billions of dollars, or allocated billions and billions of dollars to addressing these things, and it didn't really seem to twig with voters. And no one seemed to be convinced this was going to make any difference in their lives, and it didn't do anything to lessen that fatigue that voters seem to have with Justin Trudeau. This is kind of normal. I mean, most governments, when they get to the 8, 9, 10-year mark, people start getting tired of them and start calling for change, right, even if they were happy with the way the government performed. And there is, a constituency of people who are certainly happy with the way Justin Trudeau has governed. He dealt with the pandemic. He dealt with the Freedom Convoy issue. He's dealt with instability across the world, the invasion of Russia, the conflict in Gaza. And he's also dealt with, in his first mandate, had to deal with Donald Trump being in the White House and all the threats to Canadian industry that caused. Remember the tariffs that the Americans put in on Canadian-made steel and aluminum, the renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement. And Trudeau got through all this okay, but I think it's just we're at the point now. People have been seeing him as prime minister for coming up on 9 years now, and they would like a change.
So do we know at this point, and we're speaking on Tuesday afternoon, as you mentioned, this national caucus meeting is on Wednesday. What do we know about Trudeau's reaction to this latest push and this letter that he's apparently going to be presented with? Has he said anything? Do we have any indication?
Well, every time Justin Trudeau steps in front of a live microphone, he is asked the same question: do you intend to lead the party into the next election campaign? And of course, those questions come more often now because of this little mutiny that's brewing within his caucus. But his response is always the same. Absolutely, he's committed to running again. He has no plans to leave. He understands that sometimes people will get nervous. This is something that former Prime Minister Jacques Chrétien famously called the nervous Nellies. These MPs in their caucus who, when an election campaign is in the not too distant future, start getting nervous about their own possibility for re-election. Because, of course, if the Liberal brand is eroded because of the Prime Minister, it makes it much, much harder for Liberal MPs, especially those in kind of marginal seats. They won only narrowly in the last election campaign. They get extremely concerned about their re-election prospects and the possibility that they're going to be out of their jobs. So this is kind of a normal thing that happens. But so far, Trudeau is not showing any signs that he is heeding this. He was asked this morning on the way into a cabinet meeting whether his leadership was at risk, and he replied in French, one-word answer, no. So pretty clear he's not going anywhere, at least on his own volition.
Give us a sense of how bad things are for the Liberals. You mentioned tons of polls. Like, what happens if there's an election today?
If there was an election today, it would very likely result, assuming these poll numbers hold, that is a 20 percentage point lead for the Conservatives over the Liberals, and the Liberals essentially neck and neck with the NDP in most places. The result would very likely be a Conservative majority government, and potentially one of the largest majority governments the Conservatives have ever won. The Conservative vote is inefficient in pollster terms because they can increase the amount of support they're getting nationally really by pushing up their numbers in Alberta. But even if their share of the popular vote is up around, over 50%, even in Alberta, it doesn't give them any more seats. So they have to kind of win the popular vote nationwide by a fair margin. But you look at these numbers, these polling numbers that are coming out, it looks like they are in that zone. And if there were an election, Trudeau could potentially be leading his party to an historic defeat, probably even larger than they suffered in 2011 when Michael Ignatieff was the leader and Stephen Harper led his conservatives to their first majority government. It took a long time for the Liberals to recover from that. And it wasn't until Trudeau came along that they were able to bounce back and kind of reverse things. So it is bad. The numbers are as bad as that they've been. And, certainly the worst that Trudeau has ever faced. Worth noting, though, and many of the supporters will remind you of this, Justin Trudeau's never lost an election. Every time he's run for MP himself, he's won. And in the 3 federal election campaigns he's been a party leader, the Liberals have staged a pretty significant comeback in the polls, although none, notably, Jordan, as great as the one they're facing right now.
So what exactly happens at this caucus meeting? Is there an agenda? What do we know about what goes on inside the room?
Well, caucus meetings are always closed-door affairs. The media doesn't get in there. We don't see what's going on. We don't listen in. We have to rely on what MPs who are coming out of the caucus meeting tell us either on the record or on background. But we are led to believe that this group, this rebel alliance, some folks are calling them, are going to confront Trudeau verbally. They're going to stand up and say, hey, we've got this letter that X number of us have signed on to, and we really think for the good of the party, it's time for you to step down because the message will be, you've done a good job so far, you've gotten us this far. A lot of those MPs in the caucus owe their jobs in politics to Justin Trudeau. A lot of them were first elected with him as leader in 2015. So there's a loyalty a lot of them have to him, but also concerns about their own job security. So they will be verbally confronting him and he will have a chance to respond and there'll be an opportunity for other members of caucus to speak. We don't know today how large this group is. As I say, the estimates range between 30, 35, some people say as many as 40 MPs. It's still only a fraction of the 153 total Liberal MPs who sit in the House of Commons now, but you can't really count cabinet ministers because they are, of course, naturally loyal to the Prime Minister because he gave them their jobs in cabinet and then they get a larger salary, they get a car and driver, they get some other perks of the job, plus they get the boost when they are themselves going into a re-election in their own ridings because it's easier to run as a cabinet minister, raises your profile, than just as a backbench MP. So we don't really know what's going to happen in this meeting tomorrow. It's going to be really interesting. You'll have lots of journalists waiting and watching from outside to see what happens when it comes out. But the betting is that Trudeau will resist the call to step down. He'll explain why he thinks he's best positioned to lead. And then it'll be over to those other MPs. What are they going to do now if Trudeau doesn't willingly step aside?
Is there a mechanism for a caucus voting out a leader or passing a motion that he should go or anything at all? Or is this like Justin Trudeau's discretion or nothing?
Entirely at his discretion. It used to be, not that long ago, that the Prime Minister was always the leader of the party that was elected by the MPs, the caucus of MPs in the House of Commons. That has changed in sort of modern days, and now parties, including the Liberals, elect their leaders with a much larger leadership race. It drums up support. It raises money for the party.
Right.
The only thing they can do is put enough public pressure on him. And ultimately, it's probably going to take some prominent Liberals who are not in cabinet coming out and saying publicly, putting their names to this, appearing in front of cameras, talking about why they think Justin Trudeau should go now, and also explaining what they will do if he doesn't. It's quite likely that a lot of them, if Trudeau rebuffs this offer tomorrow, will just say, okay, well, I guess we tried, but we're stuck with it. Or it's possible you could see a splintering of the Liberal caucus. Maybe some of these Liberal MPs are so concerned that they will decide to sit as independents for the rest of this session in Parliament before the next election. But that would create all kinds of problems for them. They'd lose a lot of their financial support from the party, and a lot of them would have to run for a new nomination contest in the running. It would be very messy for them to do that. I don't think that's a likely outcome. But really, we are into kind of uncharted territory. We don't know exactly what's going to happen and what that group of MPs who are so unhappy are going to do if Trudeau says no.
Speaking of prominent Liberals, though not necessarily in the federal Liberal Party, what's been going on kind of outside the party over the last few days as it's been clear that there is momentum to move Trudeau out in terms of, people just saying, hey, maybe I could be interested.
This is a favorite parlor game in Ottawa, especially among journalists, of talking about if there was a vacancy in the leadership, who would come forward. So most people look to the people who are currently in cabinet right now, and there are some contenders. The name of Mélanie Joly, Foreign Affairs Minister. She's very popular in Quebec, helped run the Quebec campaign last year. The caucus of Liberal MPs from Quebec have a lot of fondness for her. and would likely support her in a leadership race. Similarly, François-Philippe Champagne, also from Quebec, currently the industry minister, a very skilled politician at kind of winning people over in the room, is considered to be one of the strongest performing members of Trudeau's cabinet who would be in contention. And then there's Dominic LeBlanc, public safety minister, who has, according to a report in the Globe and Mail, was kind of quietly looking around, seeing if he could get support from within the caucus or if he could get backing from other people to make a run. But the other names outside of Parliament right now that we're hearing bandied around, of course, Mark Carney.
Right.
We've been hearing about Mark Carney as a potential Liberal leader for at least a decade.
For years, yeah.
Carney was the governor of the Bank of Canada, then later became the governor of the Bank of England. He is high profile, well-versed in obviously matters of economics, is well known on the international stage, maybe not known as well here in Canada. The problem for Mark Carney is he doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons right now. So if it was a case of them having to change leaders right now, he would have to find a way of getting elected, and that would require a current Liberal MP to give up their seat. Most likely it would be in an Ottawa area riding because that's where Carney lives.
Right.
The other name we heard started this week, it was actually totally off the wall, was based on a Radio Canada report that Christy Clark, the former premier of British Columbia, is interested in running. And she issued a statement saying that she would like to be involved in the reinvention or rebuild of the Liberal Party whenever it comes. But she also noted that that job is currently not vacant because Justin Trudeau is in it. Now, Clark was a member of the BC Liberal Party when she was premier of the province. That does not directly map on to the Federal Liberal Party. They are two different entities, organizations, and although they share the same name and some of the branding, they are very different, or were very different organizations. The Liberal Party of BC doesn't really it's not really functioning anymore. So I don't really buy it. I think Christy Clark is much more conservative, a small c conservative, and possibly large c conservative than the current Federal Liberal Party. I don't think that would necessarily be a good fit. If she decided to run for it, she would be offering to take the federal Liberals into a much different direction on policy, on economic policy. Chiefly, she is much more conservative, and I'm not sure how much enthusiasm there would be for her. But it's interesting to talk about all the possibilities, all the different people who might suddenly be enticed into doing this. And the question is, when would they do it? If you are Mark Carney, do you want to make a run for the leadership right now before the next election when the outcome for your party is very uncertain? It's not clear that just changing leaders is going to give the Liberals the kind of bounce that, say, the Democrats in the United States had.
Right. I was going to ask you, who wants to captain this ship? It's not looking good. Isn't it better to just sort of wait and then start fresh from the bottom?
That may be what some people are thinking. And Mark Carney did a podcast interview the other day with a Liberal MP from Toronto, Nate Erskine-Smith, and he said that he does intend to get involved in federal politics, but he didn't say when. And that is really crucial because, it's quite likely that Carney is looking at this thinking the Liberals are going to get massacred in the next election. And why would he want to be the leader who leads them into that and then stick around for what potentially could be 4 years of conservative majority government as the leader of maybe the official opposition, but quite possibly not, maybe even the leader of the fourth party? There's a scenario based on the current polls where the Conservatives could win a majority, the Bloc Québécois wins enough seats in Quebec only that they become the official opposition, and then the New Democrats and the Liberals fight for whatever's left over, which would not be much. That's probably not an appealing option for somebody like Mark Carney, who could go make lots of money and is making probably lots of money right now with his role with Brookfield Asset Management and Bloomberg, the international media giant. So he's got lots on the go right now. I don't know if he'd want to sit in the opposition benches for 4 years, earning an MP's salary of only 170-something thousand a year.
You kind of mentioned that this week could see Trudeau exit. Presumably he wouldn't make a snap decision Wednesday. The last time we spoke, we were talking about a confidence motion. There's going to be more and more of those. What do the next few weeks look like on Parliament Hill?
Yeah, the confidence motions are things that come up pretty regularly. It's not just like the kind of the Conservatives brought, calling out other MPs to vote non-confidence in the government, which would, of course, force the Prime Minister to go to the Governor-General and ask her to dissolve Parliament and trigger another election campaign. But there are regular votes that go on in the House of Commons on bills involving money. And anything involving money or taxation policy, raising new taxes, spending large amounts of money. Any votes on those are automatically confidence motions, and the government could fall on those. There will be some of those coming up in short order because we think the government is still intending to deliver a full economic statement, kind of like a mini budget, and any vote on the results on that would, of course, be a matter of confidence. If the government were to lose that, boom, we'd be into another election campaign. But right now, the House of Commons is kind of log-jammed. The Conservatives have a motion requiring the government to produce certain documents related to a green energy fund. They're kind of at loggerheads with the government on this. So far, the Liberals have refused to release these documents publicly, saying it would compromise the privacy of people involved, and it could potentially jeopardize a related RCMP investigation into the same green energy fund that is ongoing. And the RCMP have said, we don't need the documents. We can get them ourselves. The RCMP can go in and swear a request before Justice of the Peace asking for a search warrant or a production order. They could get all the documents that they need. So the House of Commons is kind of like gridlock. Nothing is happening right now. Legislation isn't getting passed. There's no new government bills that are being debated right now. And that has triggered the possibility or the speculation that the government may do something called proroguing.
Oh, right.
It's effectively hitting the reset button on Parliament. All the bills that are on the table on the order paper at that moment die. Committees have to be reconstituted and you have to restart it. And the government would have to come back after proroguing and deliver a throne speech laying out its new priorities. It's possible Justin Trudeau would do that. It's possible he would do that if he's planning to quit. He might think that the party needs a couple of months in order to choose a new leader once he leaves. So if they were to prorogue, that means that they couldn't lose a confidence motion in that period and they wouldn't be forced into an election campaign before they'd even selected a leader. So that's one possibility that's being considered. It is kind of a nuclear option for Trudeau, and it would, if he were to do it, he would certainly draw allegations, particularly from the Conservatives, that he was shutting down the democratic process, shutting down Parliament because he can't face the heat from the opposition side. The Liberals would then reply that the Conservatives, by filibustering this motion of producing these documents, had essentially caused Parliament to become dysfunctional, and there was no point continuing until they have a chance for this reset, this prorogation process. Stephen Harper had done it during his time. It's a risky move because it can create a backlash, but it might be one thing that if he is about to lose his job imminently, that he may consider going down to Rita Hall, talking to the Governor General and getting her to sign off on proroguing.
Last question, and I'm not going to make you answer it, but if I had to ask you if Trudeau was still the Liberal leader like 1 month from now, what would you think?
It's possible he could still be the Liberal leader a month from now. I think he's got a chance that he can quell this insurrection in his own caucus.
Again.
Yeah, I don't know that the MPs who have signed off on this letter, if they were so committed to this, that they're willing to take more drastic steps, like deciding to sit as sort of an independent caucus or not. I don't think we're at that point. And I say that because really, they're not coming forward. Only one MP who signed the letter, who's planning to run again in the next election, that's Sean Casey from Prince Edward Island. He's the only one who has spoken out publicly, who's put his name to it. So until we start seeing that, I think Trudeau is going to be relatively safe. And also the possibility that we could be into an election campaign at any time because the NDP has withdrawn from the supply and confidence agreement to keep the Liberals in power.
Right.
That means this is a very fragile government right now, and it could fall at any time. So I don't know, even if people who are dissatisfied with Trudeau's leadership are willing to force him out right now and run the risk of being in the midst of a leadership race at a time when suddenly the government falls and an election is called.
Interesting times, Glenn. As always, thank you for explaining this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Glen McGregor, reporting from Parliament Hill. That was The Big Story. For more, you can head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can, of course, shoot us some feedback on this interview with Glenn or any episode we've done, or you can suggest an episode that we should do by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or calling us and leaving a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find this podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts or wherever you get your least favorite podcasts, though hopefully we're not among the latter. If you do like us and you're in a podcast player that allows it, please consider leaving us a review. It helps other people who haven't found us yet discover the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.